name is Vicki Toulouse. If you don't know me, I'm currently down here at Mountain View. I just want to give you a brief background, just because I'm not like a passive observer in this class. I have a background in mass communication. I worked in the psychophysiology lab during my grad school time at Texas Tech, and we would, if you came into my lab when I was, 22, I would have hooked you up to electrodes, and we would have put you in front of a television and made you watch different types of scenes from movies and TV shows, and tried to see what kind of response we could get from you. And we would record how your body physically responds to it, so like how much your skin perspires, how much you startle, or how much you smile or frown, and your heart rate. We can measure all of that. So while you might not think that something scared you or made you happy or whatever, your body would tell us exactly how scared or how not scared you were. Or not even just scared, but just how much you were reacting to it. So that was, of course, 12, 13 years ago. I didn't have a smartphone then. I guess some of the really cool kids did, but technology has changed. And so when I took this job, and I found out I'm supposed to teach classes, I can teach them about whatever subject I want, as long as it pertains to parenting and helping parents become better parents and helping them to understand how to help their children or great-grandchildren. Then this became really interesting to me because of this background. But I did want to give you guys just a little heads up. I'm not, I got some skin in the game, as it were. I don't have the clicker. Thank you. You're amazing. So a little background about the brain, and I wrote things down, so forgive me if I look at this because I lose my train of thought and I chase rabbits. We learn by our neurons firing and sending electrical pulses down to another neuron and then to another neuron and to another neuron, and that's called a neural pathway. Most people know that. Right, so that's how we learn to walk. That's how we learn to talk. That's how we learn to stand in lines and stay still and not touch our friends, as I see kindergartners walking down the hall. I want you guys to I want to make sure that you guys know the brain's always working, right? It is always learning something new, but it doesn't always immediately, new things don't always immediately solidify. Right? If you want to think of a neural pathway of growing, like making a trail, right? If your brain starts out as a big grassy field and then you just released 4 and 5-year-olds onto it and just said, go run. They make little paths in the grass where the grass would be bent over. But if you tried to follow those paths the next day, you wouldn't be able to, right? Because it's not stuck in, it's not dug in. It takes time and repetition for it to dig in and to really become something that is learned, or in this case, in the case of the trail, it's a genuine path. So it takes time, it takes repetition, and that's true for everything. That's true for adults. It's more true for adults. Something that I think we forget, or maybe even don't know, is that a 2-year-old's brain has twice as many connections as an adult brain. There are 3 major times when your brain is developing when you are approximately 2. A lot of people think of the terrible 2s, and it's not that they're terrible, it's that the kids are just, they're taking in so much and they're learning so much that it's overwhelming. About 7, which is actually a period of necrosis where a lot of the unused neural connections die off. So if the brain is okay, I've had these neural connections for 7 years, they're not very strong, I don't use them very often, I'm cutting it off so that I can learn this one better, okay? And then when we hit the teen years, and we all know about the teens and the hormones and the frontal lobe developing, that's how we develop reason. I think most people are familiar with that. Going back to that pathway, when we learn something from childhood, and that becomes a very well-worn path, then when your brain gets under stress, and you can't necessarily use your reason, if you become really emotional, you'll go back to that well-worn path. So if you've ever walked in on your child and they're doing something wrong and you're "Lah!" and out comes your mom or your dad, it's that well-worn path that you learned as a child, right? it takes a lot of thought, like staying in the present moment, to be able to not just default to that emotional neural pathway that maybe isn't the best. Maybe you know not to ask your child, like, what is wrong with you? Because there's nothing wrong with them. They just made a poor choice. But that doesn't mean, and I'm guilty of this, that doesn't mean that you don't like say that in that moment. The fastest way to make new neural pathways in the brain is through extreme emotion, both good or bad. That's what, like, when you think of trauma, PTSD, like those bad emotions, they can make that neural pathway, that event or whatever has happened, very deep, very strong, very quickly. Or through play. And that just has to do with the chemicals in your brain that are released during play and during like times of like fear and terror. It's just the dopamine, the serotonin, and the noradrenaline or norepinephrine that are released really help make those experiences stick. And if you think about it, like you can remember as a child the anticipation of Christmas morning, right? Oh, I'm gonna open presents, it's gonna be so exciting. But you probably don't remember the meal afterwards, right? Like that wasn't nearly as exciting, but that in anticipation and that adrenaline of what was gonna happen really made that sink in. Okay, so, but play. Let's talk about how, okay, it's gonna, my PowerPoint skills I'm gonna work on them. I'm working on them. There are 3 types of play that really are helpful for children, that they really go through. And I'll take a quick second. So phonics and vocabulary is probably the only thing that is not solely learned by play. It is usually learned by reading to your kids, talking with your kids, talking around your kids, letting them hear your vocabulary and letting them join in the discussion, teaching them what words mean and things like that. Math and self-regulation are almost always learned through play. And that can be, there's 3 types of play. Object play, which is just how do I use an object in space, right? How do I manipulate this object? Locomotor play, which is just physical play, like how do I move my body? How do I use my body in a space? How do I sit on the rug in this square and not on my neighbor? And it's a skill. It's a life skill. And social play, which is just regulating your own emotions, regulating your own behavior, and that comes through playing with kiddos around them, playing with adults around them, and combinations, right? They can be playing with other kids, and then when the 2-year-old hits the other one, that's when the adult steps in and says, we don't hit. Play is really important because it releases norepinephrine as well as dopamine and serotonin, which is one of those. Norepinephrine is like making a path with a little front end loader as opposed to like with rakes and shovels. You just, if you can make the kids enjoy it and teach it and be fun with it, they're going to learn it so much faster than if they're just having to like do rote memorization. Okay, and that's how kids have learned for centuries. But now, maybe not centuries. We haven't had schools that long. But what's that? Yeah, maybe a couple centuries. But now, what do? We have apps to teach our kids, right? We have an app for reading. We have an app for writing. We have an app for math. We have smartphones at our fingertips, and we can just hand them. It's stuck in my shirt. We can just hand them to our kiddos and be like, here, learn the alphabet. Well, here's the problem with that. You can download educational apps for your kiddos, and they can even say like backed by research, but here's the deal. Their research can be done by in-house companies looking to find the results that they want to find. They're like, this app, increases letter retention. How did they test that? They had the kids look at the letter, do the thing, and then 10, 15 seconds later, they could say, oh, that's the letter A. It says A. Yes, but could they remember it 2 minutes later? Could they remember it a day later? Could they remember it a week later? That they don't test. They're testing short-term memory as opposed to long-term memory, and it's not necessarily going to actually show an increase in overall learning. Always remember your child is a targeted demographic. We worked actually, when I was in the psychophys lab, we worked on eye tracking for a video game for Verizon? I think it was Verizon. They may have changed actually. I'm thinking back in 2008. I don't know if Verizon was a thing. I don't remember that well that time. But I do remember that we were testing a video, like a driving video game, and they put billboards on the side of the road in the video game to see if people would look at them to look at the cell phone to try to sell the cell phone. So, I mean, don't ever think that your kid is not like a targeted demographic. They totally are. Okay. So this is just like how many people, how many kids, how many parents really self-report that this is how much their children use media. The statistics seem really high, but this was accurate pretty much between all of the articles that I read. I read about 20 articles that specifically documented child media use, I guess reported child media use. I thought it was kind of high. I want to say the children spend an average of 7 hours in front of a screen every day. That is the most recent data. I looked at articles that were like say 10 years old, and we're talking, and then it was 2 hours a day. So our smartphones have really changed the amount of screen time that kids get every day. And we use screens now in school more than we ever have. Way more than we ever have. And that's not just a school policy. It's district policies, it's state policies. So it's, and a lot of times it's above the teacher's head. Like we use ST Math in the school. So everybody uses ST Math for math intervention time. And then they also would get, if it's their computer lab day, they'll get an hour in the computer lab. So, I mean, you can see how these times will start to add up. Okay, so what we know about media use in the very young. We don't know a lot. It's really hard to put a little baby in a lab and have them sit there and do something on a computer or a tablet or whatever and measure that with their EEGs or to do long-term studies that can be very difficult and very hard to make it so that you're not intentionally causing harm. Like if you're like, I think this is going to hurt their long-term memory. Well, if you think that that's what you're going to do, so you're basically intentionally trying to hurt a child's long-term memory, and that's unethical. You can't do that. So it becomes very tricky, very difficult to do. You kind of have to ask the parent how much media use, how much screen time does the child have, and then look at the child's long-term memory as they progress and compare to children that have different amounts of screen time reported. So with that, I think the thing that we often miss here is that when you are learning, when you're messing with a phone, you're not really learning in the same way that you learn when you're playing or interacting with adults or any other human. Your brain is not releasing norepinephrine when you are using a screen. It doesn't. It only releases dopamine, which is the addiction chemical. So if you think about people that go to a casino and they just want to push the button or do the slots, like that's the same, like that ching is the same chemical release that a screen will produce. So when we're not offering them chances for their brain to produce serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine together to learn. We know that there's a negative correlation between between language development and watching television before the age of 2. We know that infants younger than 12 do not follow dialogues or sequential screenshots, so you can show them a screenshot out of order, and it doesn't change their perception of it, whereas like an older child will be like, I don't know what's going on. And we do know that children are motivated by media. So we do know that media can help get kiddos over the hump if they don't, if we can't reach them in other ways.
Before you leave that slide,
Yeah.
does that third bullet imply that at age 2, that correlation starts to happen?
Yeah. Yes. If a child younger than age 2 watches television, and it's a per minute, so like for every 30 minutes. So what they did. Let me take a step back. What they did is they had children take this language development test, and they had them take it at certain ages, and then they asked the parents, okay, how much TV does the child watch? Right. So the child watched 30 minutes. An hour and 30 minutes, 2 hours, whatever. And they could correlate a block of time for a specific amount lower score, I guess I should say. So I'm throwing out numbers. I don't know that this is the exact number. I don't remember those exact numbers. But if they watched 30 minutes, let's say that their score was a 95. And if they watched an hour, let's say their score was 90. And an hour and a half, and it was 85, and 2 hours, and it was 80, and it went on and on and on like that. Again, it's probably not the actual numbers. Don't quote those numbers as like, this is what she said is going to happen. But we do know that that's a negative effect, and it actually lasted through 4th grade. So it didn't just start at 2, and then like once they got into school and with their peers and they caught up, it lasted through 4th grade. So they had lower language development than their peers who watched less TV into 4th grade. Now, there's a flaw in that study. It's like, do we know if that is because they were still watching that same amount of television at home? Did they stop watching that same amount? Would it reverse if they watched less television? Does it have to do with how much interaction they have with their parents? There's a lot of questions regarding that, but we do know that television does not stimulate conversation, right? Do you talk when you're watching the TV? Right? Your kids don't, right? They just sit there and zone out. That's what mine do. So, because they're not using their vocabulary, they're not developing their own language, then their brain's not working.
I guess the thing I was interested in knowing, in my case, we have a 6-year-old.
Okay.
And there was an interest in television at about age 2.
Sure.
But only from watching the cartoons and watching the activity.
Sure.
Not necessarily comprehending everything that was going on in the plot of the cartoon.
Okay.
About age 4, we got him a tablet. And I think I have observed a marked difference in his learning from a tablet and using a tablet to go through and find the things that were of interest to him versus a television.
Okay.
A television, he would look at if there was something there that really interested him. He would watch it until that disappeared, and then he was off doing something else.
Sure.
The tablet, on the other hand, he works with that, and when there's something that doesn't interest him anymore, I'll open up something else, and then open up something else.
Sure.
So it would appear to me that based upon what we're saying here, that this correlation begins to grow at age 2.
Well, I would say that's probably more due to the fact that we can measure language more at age 2 than we can measure at age 1, because, how many words does a 1-year-old have? But versus a 2-year-old, a 1-year-old might have, maybe 10 words if they're like on the high end, and a 2-year-old will have 100, So I think that it might be a little bit more to do with what we can actually measure.
Okay.
So, I will say, tablets can be tricky to measure because what are they watching? Are they just watching Mickey Mouse Clubhouse, or are they actively searching out like dinosaur videos? Are they learning about, does that make sense? Are they watching more documentaries? Are they doing Sesame Street?
The whole gamut.
Yeah, right, and it becomes a little bit more difficult to kind of know what are they, like how is that affecting them? And this is where it's tricky, right? It's tricky to understand how media affects children because there's so much in the way of technology, so many possibilities. And then like kids are motivated by media. We know that they're motivated by media, and we know that they have this great ability to absorb information. And if they find it very interesting and they take, so let's say they learn about dinosaurs and then they go and they have their dinosaur play sets and they're like, I'm the dinosaur Shrex and I eat meat and I eat 65 pounds a day and blah, because they learn that from their screen. They're more likely to remember that versus like just sitting there and watching, Dora the Explorer. There's nothing wrong with Dora, but Dora was not necessarily made to be specifically educational. It's a bilingual show, but it's not specifically designed by educators. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I want to go further along.
I skipped a slide in mine. Yeah, I did. Okay. So, quickly, there's more negative than there is positive. And a note on the positive, so like you can see, the right kind of media at the right age, we're talking about that tablet again, can lead to an increase in cognitive ability. And that is specifically measured when it is mediated by parents and play. So if you're sitting there watching Sesame Street and you're learning about the mailman and the mailman takes letters and you're like, look, this is the mailman, look, we're watching the mailman, let me show you, look, he's driving by in real life, there he goes, driving by our street, stopping at our mailbox, I wonder if we've got mail today, do we need to go take a letter, so then the child is learning more versus like just, again, zoning out and just taking it in but not paying increased attention. So negative side effects, it leads to an increased risk of obesity because you're not active when you're watching a screen. It leads to an increased sleep patterns, problems with sleep patterns, and that's largely due to our LED, LCD screens emitting blue light, and blue light acts like sunlight. And so if we watch screens later into the night when it's dark outside, it's like trying to put your kid to bed when it's setting outside, it's hard, right? So if they are still getting that, it's almost like sunshine to their brain, it's harder for them to sleep. So it's important it's easier to put your kids to bed now versus in the summertime because they have that period of dark where they just kind of like slowly get sleepy, just naturally. And so if the screens, LCD, LED screens can wreck that by making your brain think that it's still sunny, so they want to stay out. It can lead to a risk of attention problems. So going back to the psychophys, we know in psychophysiology that every time that people have orienting effects, the media produces orienting effects in people. That's probably the correct way to say it. And what that means is that every time when you're watching a movie, every time the camera changes or the scene changes, your body has an orienting reflex, which your heart rate lowers, your skin conductivity increases, and it is like a mini fight or flight response. So your brain's trying to figure out something just happened. And every time there is a camera angle change or a scene change, that happens. So adults will habituate to that pretty quickly, like within 20 minutes. Children don't. It'll take them about an hour to habituate to that. If you think about, like, if you've ever come out of an action movie and you're like, yeah, that was a good movie. I'm a little fired up, I'm a little excited. That's how exciting movies are for children. They aren't exciting for us as adults because we can habituate to it, but children, their brains just haven't learned how to yet. And that is what leads to the risk of attention problems, is because their brain constantly starts looking for that like, okay, what's happening next? And then what's happening next? So does that make sense?
That's why it's so hard to watch kids.
It does, and I
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense now, because I'm like, why? Oh, God. You
Yeah.
get almost motion sickness watching some of them.
I'm sorry, what were you saying?
Well, I think it makes sense, but I guess my concern
Yes, sir.
is the 6-year-old that I mentioned to you before has been diagnosed as ADHD.
Okay.
And he's got the tablet in front of him all the time,
Okay.
not always looking at it.
Sure.
It'll be sitting on a table beside him while he is intensely interested and totally committed putting together a Lego project, as an
Okay.
example.
Okay, that's awesome.
Or he'll be outside playing, running around, kicking a soccer ball,
Okay.
but his tablet is there, sitting on a chair, in the area that he's playing,
Okay.
and,
Is it on?
oh yeah, it's on. And I'm just wondering, has there been any research that you know of that discusses the negative influences of screen time to creating the symptoms of ADHD?
So if you think of attention problems being kind of a marker for ADHD, then increased screen time does increase those markers. Now, ADHD also has other neurological processing issues that go with it. So I'm not gonna, and I am by no means a, what would that be, like a psychoneurologist, neuropsychologist? Not a crazy neurologist, sorry. So that is a marker, they correlate. We cannot say that they cause, right? Again, going back to, you can't put a kid in front of a screen and think, I think we're gonna make this child have ADD by making them watch a screen, and this child that we're not gonna put in front of the screen, they're not gonna get ADD, and let's see what happens. We can't do that, like, that's not ethical. So there's correlation there. There have been other studies that have not been replicated, let me say that, they have not been replicated, where children with ADHD have been taken completely off of all screens, like no screen time whatsoever, and seen marked improvement in there. And this was in France 4 or 5 years ago. Anyway, they saw marked improvement in their symptoms. Does that mean that they saw complete like reversal and all this? No, probably not. I think that ADHD has existed for kids in our country for years, and I mean millennia probably. What has happened is the speed at which we give them information now has increased. So it's like someone who's light sensitive that constantly is being bombarded by light, right? It just is going to exacerbate their sensitivity. So if if we can mitigate those, then they're going to be less bombarded, and their symptoms should be eased.
Okay, I didn't mean to take you off the track too much.
No. That's a fantastic question.
It's just that it's an issue that I got to live with.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think it's an issue that a lot of people live with, and we don't really know how to deal with it. I mean, it's kind of like the idea of like, if you are an autistic kid and you're constantly bombarded with lights and sounds and this and that, because we live in such a fast-paced society, we're constantly going. Whereas if this child had lived 200 years ago, maybe he would end up being a farmer, a little bit eccentric, but like able to deal with his distresses. Does that make sense? Because we live in a less accommodating environment for people that have those problems. I hesitate to call them problems because they're often like married with such wonderful, gifts. But does that make sense though? We exacerbate their issues without necessarily giving them safe space to work through it. It leads to an increased risk in anxiety and depression, and this is especially true as they get older. They get their own smartphones, they get social media, they get connected to their friends. Let's see, I think I wrote something down about this. So there's no processing of emotions necessarily when you're using a screen. So there's no self-regulating of skills. So so if you think about the ideas of, I get mad. Well, if I don't have a screen in front of me, I have to sit there and I have to deal with my mad, right? And I have to breathe through it, or I have to go like work out or do whatever I have to do to lower my mad and to get through that and to move on and move forward productively. But if they're sitting there with the screen, they might not have that that ability to work through that because they don't have the self-regulate. They're not being able to self-regulate and look inside and being mindful of their own emotions to work through them. Yes. Let's see. I was supposed to mention this on the last slide. Immediate exposure in infants was recommended to be named a public health risk in one study that I read. And we'll talk more about what the American Pediatric Society says about
I
that.
feel really bad if you went back to that.
Do what?
No, I feel really bad if you went back to that.
Oh.
So I was one of those parents about that, my kid can read, or my baby can read.
We didn't know.
I know, and
It's
now
when
I'm thinking about it, I'm like, when she was 9 months old, I had like half an hour of learning how to read.
we know, but it's one of those things like, do we know that? Did we know that like 5, 10, how old?
I don't know.
She was like 12 years ago? 12 years old?
Yeah, she's 13 now, but yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, eggs have been bad, good, bad, good, bad, good about 20 times in my lifetime, so.
You never know. I mean, did we know that 12 years ago? Absolutely not. We did not. Don't feel bad about yourself. This is why we're learning. And if she spent 30 minutes a day on it versus, 3 hours a day, or I read another study that was just having the TV on in the house as background noise will actually lower not cognitive development, language development. And there could be a myriad of reasons for that. Like, is the parent talking to the kids and watching the instead of watching the TV, or watching the TV instead of talking to the kids? Like there's, just because it's there doesn't mean that the TV is what's wrong. It could be some other symptom that the TV induces. Does that make sense?
So what you're saying is it's complex.
It is very complex. There's no right answers. What we do know is that screen time doesn't usually make positive differences. That's what we do know. There are exceptions to that, of course, like everything. Like the English language, there's always an exception to the rule. Let's see. Okay. Oh gosh. See, I'm telling you guys, my PowerPoint slides are not like fantastic. Do I need to click it again? What is there? Yep, look at that. Okay, so side effects of parental media use. This is the one that like my mama heart was just like cut to the core, right? Like, oh my gosh, I am the problem. When we aren't able to engage with our kids directly, then they are missing out valuable learning opportunities. We have a lot of preschoolers that have a hard time with eye contact because we assume they didn't learn it at home. Now there are other reasons that they could have poor eye contact, but in general it's a learned skill, right? Just like walking, just like knowing how to be quiet, knowing how to not sit on our friend's lap on the carpet. These are all learned skills. Learning how to, like, I am upset that you have my toy and I don't get to play with it, but I understand that if I wait 10 minutes, I'll get to play with it. All learned skills that are often mediated through parents. And if we don't have that, it's that social play again. If they don't start learning those self-regulation skills by the age of 5, is what most studies say. If they don't start learning it by the age of 5, then once they hit age 7, and that necrosis that we talked about, where the brain starts killing off those like unused neural connections, it starts to go. Self-regulation is one of those things that starts to go, and it's hard to learn it back. It's so hard to get it back. So if we learn it young, if we teach our kids young, then they're going to be able to have better self-regulating skills as they age. And that's important. Like, I'm not the best self-regulator, right? You saw me the other day when Gabe did something, I just like threw a piece of paper in the air. I had no words. All I could do was go, that's not necessarily the best thing to do. I mean, I guess it was better than yelling, but it still wasn't good. As an adult, I should be able to be like, okay, this is what happened, this is what you did, and this is why this is wrong, and we need to talk about this, and this is what the consequence is going to be. Keeping my cool, but, we all struggle here. Okay. So, recommendations. And this is from the American Pediatric Society, American Society of American Pediatrics. I can't remember which way it goes, but American Pediatric Academy. I think it's the APA. Acronyms. So, children under 2 should not use media. Don't use media during meals. I mean, think about like at a restaurant, if you don't have your tablet and like the kid is like crying because they're so hungry and they can't wait for their food. That's a self-regulating skill that we just have to learn. We have to learn that, yes, our neighbor's fajitas got delivered and they smell so good and we're all super hungry. We just gotta wait for our food. No media for an hour before bed, and that goes back to that blue light emitting screen tricking our brain, and it'll mess with our sleep patterns. Less than an hour a day for kids 2 to 5, less than 2 hours a day for kids 5 to 8. Now this is really tricky, right? Because when you have really young kids, or you have kids in school, you don't necessarily know how much screen time they're getting at school. We talked about that at the beginning, right? They could be doing ST Math. They could have had computer lab that day. I know for us that while researching this, and my kids are really mad about it, I changed our movie nights. We don't watch movies except on the weekends. We watch one movie, so it's under 2 hours, and it's only on Friday night and Saturday night, and that's it. And we try to do it earlier so that they can have their bath time and have some time to not be in front of a screen before bedtime. It's recommended to have a concrete strategy to manage your media use, like media screens go off at 6:30, 7:30, whatever time an hour before bedtime is. Don't put a screen in a child's bedroom, and that is like, you think they're going to bed, but they're not. They're turning it on, they're playing their video games, they're doing whatever they want to do. In general, they recommend to put screens out of sight if it's a non-screen time, because if you don't see it, you're less likely to be like, oh yeah, I pick up my phone. And then if you reduce your own media use as a parent, it can encourage parent-child interactions, which is really important. Okay, so you have a handout on how to reduce screen time. I would say one of the biggest thing is like just doing something else that does not require a screen. I found it really interesting, the 2010 study I mentioned, that we were at 2 hours a day in general for screen time. We were also at 2 hours a day for outside time. So the kids would spend 2 hours on a screen, but they would also spend 2 hours outside. And now it is 7 hours on a screen, and it's like something like 30 minutes outside. That's like the recess. Like, kids aren't outside enough. There's a whole, like, we could spend a whole hour talking about the benefits of being outside and how that's good for your brain. We're not gonna, that's long. That's another topic for another day. I brought games and toys in case we had parents with kiddos show up, as examples of what things you can do that aren't giving a kid a screen. These are for littles, because I assumed if we had kids come, they would be little. But hobbies and Lego. I mean, we got a Lego board right there. I mean, all those things are fantastic, and they're not just teaching. They're not just teaching self-regulating. They're teaching problem solving and engineering and mathematical skills and memory skills and reading. You just give a kid a book and you can read. Anyway, alternatives to media. structured so it looks like, oh, stickers. I don't think anyone's ever said enough about stickers. I don't know how many kids I see that don't know how to peel a sticker. It's a very fine motor skill. It's tricky. It's a tricky one to learn, and they should know how to do it by the age of 4 or 5, but we don't do a lot of stickers in our society in general, and so a lot of kids don't have that skill. But like I said, it's a very fine motor skill. Drawing and coloring is a pre-writing skill, right? So if they can color inside the lines, then they're going to be able to more quickly pick up writing letters. If they can trace lines on a paper, same thing. And this games is talking about like board games. Yeah. Oh, my sources, these are all the articles that I cited. Questions? Thank you guys for coming. We recorded this, and hopefully it'll get uploaded to like our Facebook, YouTube. For people who couldn't make it, we're limited sometimes on when we can use the library because we want the kids to use it too. And I don't necessarily want to take up your after-school time because that's after-school family time. So I'm hoping that this will work out for